So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you may be today. And we are starting a new week and a new series of meetings connected to our study of Raga-vartma-candrika, the moon ray which sheds light on the path of Raga. So today we are in our 7th meeting, and we will start to study the verse number 11 of the first part, first illumination of this Raga-vartma-candrika. This verse will be studied in many parts. So this is the very first one. I think at least we will need 4 or 5 meetings to finish this first verse, but I think it's worthy giving it the time it deserves. So first of all, let's make some brief summary of our previous class, where actually we started our previous lecture making a whole brief but whole recap of everything we have seen till the previous class, so that took some time. I promise I won't do that again. And after that we studied verse number 10, which had to do with the 3 main verses that Rupa Goswami shares regarding Raga Bhakti. So in this context, Vishwanath will quote these 3 verses in a particular way, in a particular context, I mean, starting by quoting the Bhagavatam, actually, quoting the Bhagavatam. And he states, well, this Bhagavad is the essence of all Shastra, Grantaraj, the essence of all Upanishads. And he quotes one verse from the Bhagavad, Kapiladev speaking, how he, as Bhagavan, for his devotees, he's the beloved, the very soul, the son, friend, well-wisher, guru, benefactor, deity, the chosen one. Different types of relationships are presented there. So this has to do, as we will see, with Raga Bhakti. And in the context of quoting this verse, after that he quotes Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and he mentions that this Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the whole purpose of the book is to describe the different types of bhakti presented in the Bhagavad. Like the previous example where it shows how Bhagavan has so many relationships with so many devotees. Bhagavad is broadcasting that, and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is really plumbing the depths of that. And because of this, Vishwanath mentions, because this is the reason why both Bhagavad and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu are such bhakti granthas are to be accepted as our main authority. And of course, whatever Shastra comes in the line of that. So in this context, he presents now these 3 verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that deal mainly with Raga Nuga Bhakti. 3 important instructions by Rupa Goswami about how to achieve, how to accomplish Raga Bhakti proper. So these are verses 294 to 296 from the 2nd chapter of the first part of the book. So I will mention them briefly. The first verse, that this is the one we will analyze today, and maybe some other lectures. Rupa Goswami mentions there, one should remember Sri Krishna and his dear associates of one's own preference in Braj, being attached to the narrations about them, and always residing in Vrindavan. That's the first instruction on how to execute Raga Bhakti. In the second verse, it says that on this path of Raga Bhakti, the sadhaka should serve both in the sadhaka, in his sadhaka deha, and his siddha deha, following in the wake of the Braj inhabitants, Brajavasis, desiring to have a similar feeling to the one that this associate has there, the one who has chosen as a role model to follow. And the third verse speaks about how hearing, chanting, Shravan, Kirtan, and other angas of Vaidhi Bhakti are also to be engaged in the path of Raganuga Bhakti. This is what the sages have ascertained. So Vishwanath finishes his explanation from this, mentioning that these 3 verses from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu were written with the idea of delineating the requisites for practicing Raganuga Bhakti, and he will present them or explain them in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti, which we already explained what was. So basically we try to unpack a little bit this verse, our previous class, establishing the glorious position of the Bhagavad and the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as well in our particular Sampradaya, and how the verse of the Bhagavad that is quoted here by Vishwanath is also quoted by Jiva Goswami in his section of about Raga Bhakti in his Bhakti Sandarbha, where at least 3 types of relationship from Braj are included there in the Ragatmikas. in connection to the Ragatmikas. Vatsalya, Sakya, and Madhurya, the three main circles around Krishna's life revolve in Braj. So these three verses speak about angas of Raga Bhakti. So this is interesting because these three verses basically will speak about the inner content of Raga Bhakti, in the sense that externally a Raga Bhakta may follow most of the 64 angas of Vaidhi Bhakti, but with a particular approach. So in these three verses, this is mainly broadcasted, highlighted, which is the inner conception towards Shravan, Kirtan, that makes that Raga Bhakti and not Vaidhi Bhakti. So basically, these are the three verses quoted. First one, again, brief recap: meditating an eternal associate and his/her mode of service in Braj, residing in Braj at least mentally, as we will see. The second verse will speak about serving in both sadhaka and siddha deha, with some hankering for such mode. And the third one is to use the 64 angas of Vaidhi Bhakti in the context of Raga Bhakti, with certain exceptions. Most of them will be anukul, favorable, but some details may not be maybe practical or unfavorable to one's desired mood. So basically, this is the main thing that will differentiate Raga Bhakti from Vaidhi Bhakti. And Vishwanath concluded this verse saying, I will explain all this in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti. So we explain in detail why he will speak in Kamanuga Bhakti. To begin with, of course, he's in that mood, but also beyond his own subjective affinity, that's like the main current that is coming from our Gaudiya Sampradaya, coming from Mahaprabhu's experience of Radha Bhav, and the distilled experience of that in the form of Radha Dasyam, Manjari Bhav, Bhavalasrati, also called here Kamanuga Bhakti, and a specific type of Kamanuga Bhakti, as you know, because there were two types. I won't enter into detail again in that regard. But we mentioned we will try here to also explain this in a broader sense, not only limited to Kamanuga Bhakti, but also accommodating some other possibilities and affinities such as Priyanarma Sakya and so on. So starting from today, I will try to elaborate on this verse of Vishwanath, which is verse 11, the one we will see today, where he will start. He mentioned in the verse 10 these three verses, and in today's verse 11, he'll start to explain each one of them in detail. So we will try to explain that in further detail. So that may take some lectures, but I think that's more than important. So let's begin. I won't quote the whole verse, whole 11th prose, because it's too long, and it's divided in these three verses, the explanation of the three verses that Vishwanath is giving. So I will today read the first part connected to the first verse, the explanation of this first verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And in this way, I will read the second part when we will explain the second verse and so on. So let's remember for a moment which is the first of these three verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and then we go to the explanation of Vishwanath in his Raga-vartma-candrika. So this first verse, 294, second chapter, first part, says, one should remember Sri Krishna and his dear associate of one's own preference, being attached to narrations about them and always residing in Braj. Just in case, we already shared that, but I will share it again in the chat. That's the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So now let's go to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's description or explanation of this first verse. I will quote also here. Oh, 1 second. It's too long to copy and paste in one single part, so give me a moment. So here it goes, the first part of Vishwanath's explanation, and let me copy and paste the second part, and I will read all along. There are the two parts. So it says like this. Remember, this is the first part of this 11th verse, what he's explaining. This first of these three verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about the Raga Bhakti. In the first Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu verse, quoted in text 10, the previous one, the phrase Krishnam Shmaran, meaning remembering Sri Krishna, indicates that the limb of Shmaranam, or remembrance, is prominent in the path of Raganuga, as Raga is a function of the mind. Preshtam, meaning most beloved, indicates Sri Krishna, the beloved Lord of Vrindavan, who enjoys pastimes suitable to his own mood. The word Janam Chasya, his people, refer to Sri Krishna's nearest and dearest. Who are they? To answer this question, the adjective Nija Samihitam of one's own preference is used, indicating those associates who possess the mood for which one is aspiring, like Vrindavaneshwari, Sri Radha, Lalita, Vishaka, Rupa Manjari, and others. Although Sri Krishna is the object of one's desires in a passionate mood, the associates of Sri Krishna, the ladies of Braj, headed by Sri Radha, are even more the object of the devotee's desire on account of their having an excessive amount of passionate feelings which the devotee desires. Kuryat Basham Braje Sada means that one should always reside in Braj. This statement means that if it is not physically possible, at least in one's mind, one should live in Braj. So as we can see, Vishwanath is unfolding some extra ideas from the original verse, and we will try in his own line and spirit to also unpack some more content. So in this way, here Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is quoting the first of these three famous verses from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Srila Rupa Goswami is giving his seminal description of how to practice Raganuga Bhakti. We have already explained what's Raga Bhakti, what's the background of Raga Bhakti, the adhikar for that, the cause for that, and so on. But now we are entering into a more practical section. So now Vishwanath will explain these verses, as we already mentioned, mainly in the context of Kamanuga Bhakti. That's why he is also quoting at the end the reference of Radha and the Braja Gopis. But as we mentioned already also, we will try to explain it not only limited to Kamanuga Bhakti, but in a broader scope. So today let's try to explain this first verse. And three main things are mentioned in this verse, in the original verse from Rupa Goswami and also as well in Vishwanath's explanation. Three main points are mentioned in this first verse, which are, one of them, Krishna Smaran, remember Krishna, and in connection to that, not only remember Krishna, but remember Krishna in a particular Krishna, which is in connection to one's role model in Braj. So remember Krishna will imply here, remember your role model, your own role model you aspire to follow, and Krishna in that context, the two of them and their respective moods between them, the type of relationship they are having to one another. Now we will try to explain how this happens in practice gradually, but I'm just mentioning these three main points. So the first one is, remember Krishna and one's role model in Braj, in their particular moods of loving interaction. The second one is to become attached to the narrations about them. So Shravan Kirtan is also included here, in especially having a special affinity in that particular direction. Here a narration about that mood of Seva. And finally, C, the third one, always residing in Braj. So let's try to unpack this today, maybe not only today, but next class and hopefully our whole lifetimes. But a little bit of these 3 points, we will have to share some words. So the first one, or well, I'm not going in order. The point is, the idea here is we should absorb our faculties in the specific mood we have affinity for, by hearing, speaking about it. Generally, we speak with, I'm beginning with hearing and speaking because generally we start with Shravan and Kirtan. Shmaran is mentioned as generally as a byproduct of that. Whatever you speak about, whatever you hear about, generally that goes to your mind eventually. That becomes your Shmaran in one point. So I will speak first about this Shravan Kirtan, residing in Braj, and eventually I will close with Shmaran. So of course, as we know here, it is explained, you should absorb your faculties in the specific mood you have affinity for. We already explained, not necessarily we have some specific affinity from day one, unless we are coming with certain bhakti samskara from previous lifetimes, and that appears quite naturally in this particular lifetime, but certain association. But in the case we are beginning in this particular lifetime, our experience of bhakti, most probably our affinity will be the affinity that our main guidance, our main guru figure will have. We will be receiving that particular impact of his, her bhakti samskars. So again, in the beginning, we may not have an idea about that. We may not even have a specific affinity towards Vrindavan or Braj Bhav, even though that's what the Sampradaya is mainly given. In the beginning, we may have a more generic idea, Braj Krishna, Mathura Krishna, Dwarka Krishna, and I would like to be a queen. I like the opulence of Hastinapur with the Pandavas, whatever. We may have some hodgepodge conception there, but eventually with more practice, with proper guidance and association, naturally our focus will become more specific. Not only specific in terms of Vrindavan, but also specific in terms of a particular mode there, of becoming acquainted of which are the main possibilities our Sampradaya is giving, and on that context, of course, experiencing some gradual but natural affinity in one direction or another. So again, if you are coming with Bhakti Samskar from your previous lifetime, you may even have some inclination different from that of your present guru in this lifetime. But if this is your first lifetime, for sure, the affinity that your guru will have, that will be yours, your own affinity. So the point is, this will be coming gradually. At one point you will feel, oh, I feel some special attraction towards that particular type of relationship, the mode of that devotee. I feel that my Guru Maharaj also feels this. So you will start to speak with your Diksha Gurus, Siksha Gurus about that gradually when that's coming naturally, and you will receive some specific guidance. You may recite these prayers, these verses. You may study these specific sections of the scripture, will concentrate in your particular affinity. No? Eventually, everything will turn from very abstract, generic, to more and more detailed and specific. Well, that's how it's working here, as we will see. It's become more and more subtle, fine, refined details, but it should be happening in a natural way, not in a forced way, superficial way. So this is the very beginning here. Absorbable faculties in that direction we have affinity for. So again, maybe this may not be happening from day one, but that will eventually be happening gradually. By hearing, by speaking about that. Here, again, Vishwanath mentions this in the context of Kamanuga. Remember why he's making this emphasis here. And specifically, as we mentioned, Tat Tat Bhava Ichamai Kamanuga Bhakti. There were two types of Kamanuga Bhakti. Sambhogi Ichamai and Tat Tat Bhava Ichamai. Sambhogi Ichamai is the one who aspired for direct union, romantic union with Krishna, which is not our school of thought, maybe, basically, but Tat Tat Bhava Ichamai Kamanuga Bhakti, or again, Bhava Lasrati Radha Dasi Manjari Bhav. The mode of being an indirect romantic, like accomplice. So in that way, the absorption will be directed to Radha, to her servants, Radha's Yudhishthari, group leader, her servants, Lalita in a subgroup, Lalita Gan, Rupa Manjari, and the mode of service in that direction. So here, Vishwanath is highlighting the special nature of this Radha Dasyam Bhava Lasrati. In the sense of Krishna's still, I don't want to go into detail there, because this is not a seminar about Manjari Bhav, but Krishna is the Vishaya Lambana, of the object of every rasa. Whatever Sthayi Bhav you have, Dasa Sakya Vatsalya Madhurya, Krishna is the object of that. But in this particular form of Madhurya Bhav, called Bhava Lasrati, although Krishna is still the Vishaya Lambana, Srimati Radharani becomes the most prominent figure for the Manjaris. Of course, Krishna is not disappearing from that, but there's a special inclination there, attractions toward her. Again, I won't go into the details of that, but we know that there's some speciality there. So in that context, some words about Kamanuga Bhakti I have to share, of course. Even though Krishna is the object of every desire, the underlying idea here is that the Manjaris, the ones with affinity for Kamanuga Bhakti, will see Krishna as Sri Radha's beloved, Priyatama, her sweetheart, if you will, her beloved, Radha Kanta, Radha Raman, and so on. That the Manjaris won't be considering Krishna as an independently as a Nayaka, as a hero, as one's own lover. But basically, Manjaris will consider Krishna in the context of their main connection with Sri Radha, as the very pran of their Praneshwari. Basically, that's the psychology of a Manjari. Sri Radha is their Praneshwari, and Krishna is the prananath of their Praneshwari. But his role is subordinate to Radha's role in the life of the Manjaris. Manasiksha, in the Manasiksha, Raghunath Das Goswami makes that point in verse number 9. He says, I will consider Krishna as the beloved of Sri Radha. That's a prominence of my Swamini, of my mistress, to whom the Manjaris are totally surrendered. That's the real mode of a Manjari. Radha Dasyam is called. Not to be on an equal level as a friend, even though Sri Radha may offer that to the Manjaris. In the spirit of Raghunath Das, they will say, Padabjayosta Babina Varadashrameva, Nanyat Kadapi Shamayik Kaladevi Yache, Sakyayati Mama Namostu Namostu Nitya, Dasyayati Mama Rasastu Rasastu Satyam. So basically, he's saying there, in the mood of Rati Manjari, his Manjari form, I pray for rendering the most exalted service to your lotus feet. And if you offer to me friendship to be a Saki, like Lalita Vishaka, Namostu Namostu Nityam, I perpetually offer my pranam to that position. That is not for me. For me, Dasyayate Namostu Rasastu Rasastu Satyam. I find rasa, I find real wealth and taste in Dasya Bhav, in being your handmaiden. So that's the idea of Radha Dasyam. That's what is called Radha Dasyam. It's a type of Dasyam, of course. That's every rasa, if you will. So Manjari Bhav also, it may be objectively considered the topmost rasa, in the sense of the sweetest experience is expressed there, and that's established all along our sampradaya. But also subjectively speaking, we know that may be a different situation, because our subjective tongue, inner tongue, will be different in every direction. And maybe for some, I don't know, sometimes I give the example, some Guru Maharaj may like also the example, may give the example. You may like mangoes the most, and you may say mango is the topmost sweet, objectively speaking, the sweetest fruit. And we may agree with that. But subjectively, maybe for me, I like more bananas or apples or whatever. So even though objectively mango is the sweetest, I don't like sweet that much. So each one will consider their own particular affinity the best. That's the point. But even one point that I think is important also, even if we choose to consider this, okay, objectively, Manjari Bhav is the sweetest and highest, but subjectively, whatever rasa you feel affinity for, that will be your best choice. Also, we can say that even though Manjari Bhav is considered superior in these senses, it's not superior. We may say superior in flavor or quality regarding sweetness, but not in quantity, because sometimes we may feel like this. Oh, no. In quality, we have 4 types of flavors, if you will: Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya. But in quantity, there's only one flavor, which is full surrender. There's not different quantities of that. Manjari Bhav, of course, is based on certain attraction, sheer attraction, not on ambition nor pride. Manjaris are neither more proud or more humble than Mother Yashoda's servants or whatever. So this is not the point of Manjari Bhav. That's an important point. The Siddhanta, if we have a Siddhanta of the more surrendered, the higher the rasa, that's not correct. That's a myth. So everyone is fully surrendered. Everyone is given their full life air into their particular realm of service. It's not that the Manjaris are more surrendered than the ones in Sakya Bhava, and that's why they are Manjaris. It's not like this. So be careful with projecting our calculation, three-dimensional mind in terms of better, worse, more and less, and so on. So this is on one side one thing, to absorb, by hearing and speaking about these topics, one may have an affinity for. We share some ideas regarding Kamanuga Bhakti, trying to honor anyhow Vishwanath's mentioning of it. A second point, as I mentioned, that we will see in another order, is he's saying one should live in Braj, one should reside in Braj. So let's share some words about that, and after that we will continue with the first point, with this Smaran. So in the context of this projection that we have just described, when you try gradually to identify with the mode of service and an eternal associate of Bhagavan in Vrindavan, in that context, Rupa Goswami and Vishwanath here describes Kuryat Basham Brajesh Sada. One should always reside in Braj. Sada. Kirtaniya Sada Hari. Sada means always. So one should always reside in Braj. Brajavasam. So let's share some words about that, because this may be taken in different directions. And the idea is nobody to be discouraged here. So Brajavas, to reside in Braj, Vas means to take residence in, is one of the main angas of bhakti also. When Rupa Goswami mentions these 64 angas of bhakti, he kind of summarizes the 64 of them in the last 5 ones. When he says Sadhu Sangha Namar Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, Mathura Vas, Srimurtir, Shradaya Sevana. Sadhu Sangha, Nama Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, hearing Bhagavat, Mathura Vas, residing in Mathura and worshipping deity with faith and veneration. So Mathura Vas is one of these 5 Panchanga Bhakti called sometimes. You have Nava Lakshman Bhakti, pronounced by Prahlad, 9 times of Bhakti, Shravan and Kirtan and Vishnu Smaran. Here another description of Panchanga in 5 limbs, 5-limbed Bhakti. One of them is residing in Mathura. And residing in Mathura is also referred to residing in Braj. Mathura Vas, Braja Vas. This practice is very powerful actually. In the scriptures, this is told here and there. In the Purana, for example, described that just by living in the Mathura Mandal for one day, one attains Hari Bhakti, or to speak of residing there more time. Of course, what's real Brajavas, real residence, we are trying to elaborate here. But try to understand from the very immediate idea why that's favorable. Well, if you go to those places, the pastime places, the Leela are there, and naturally that may act as an udipana, as some sort of stimulant towards own remembrance and connection, an environment that somehow or other is flowing in one particular direction. So by the mercy of those sacred spots that we will find there in the Dham, we are speaking about the Dham, which even has a categorical difference with the concept of tirtha. So in the Dham, there are many tirthas, but the Dham is the personal abode of the Lord. So if you are a sincere sadhaka, naturally the flow of pastime that are actually happening there in Vrindavan, Mayapur, and so on, that will be reflected in the heart of the sincere sadhaka, naturally. There are many verses in the scriptures about that. There's one nice verse from Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where Narad Muni is talking to Gopakumar in this regard. And he mentioned that if you, oh Gopakumar, he says, if you aspire for the servitorship of the cowherd boys and girls of Raj in divine love, if you want to attain your desired aspiration, you should always live in Krishna's beloved playground. And so Vrindavan also is called like playground, Krishna's playground. I'm just reading one book called in this particular, exactly that way, Krishna's playground by Jack Hawley. So Krida Bhumi says here, the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Krida Bhumi. Krida means like play. It's another word for Lila and Bhumi. Like the land of that, the playground of that. The ground, basically in this case. So you should live there and execute sadhana bhakti. In this way, without a doubt, Narada say, you will be very quickly obtain your desired perfection of that extraordinarily rare prem. Rupa Goswami also in his famous 8th verse of Upadeshamrita, which sometimes is called, the verse in itself is called Upadeshamrita, because the whole book is called Upadeshamrita, which means the essence of all instruction, the nectar of instruction, the essence of all advice, whatever. But in the 8th verse, he actually says, what's the essence of all advice? After giving some, if you will, preliminary statements, he officially goes to this verse when he speaks about the essence of all advice. He summarizes the essence of all teachings, and he speaks about their living in Braj with Nishtha, with resolute determination. So there he's speaking about trying to withdraw your senses from sense objects which have no connection with Krishna, and one should, while living in Braj, one should use its time in a very careful way, sequential way, chanting, remembering Nama, Guna, Rupa, Lila of Sri Krishna, following the modes of Krishna's Nitya Parikars, who has spontaneous raga, who are ragatmikas. And he concludes saying, this is the essence of all instruction. So he kind of paraphrases here these three verses he's mentioning in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that we are studying now. So there are many verses like the Raghunath Dat Goswami also has many beautiful prayers about. There are many scriptures like Vrindavan-mahimamrita and so other books that are exclusively directed to chant the glories of Braj and residing in Braj with strong determination. There's one verse from the Swaniyama Dasakam of Raghunath Das when he presents some of his self-imposed vows, if you will. He says that even if in some other holy place the deity of Sri Krishna is present and the fortunate opportunities available to relish with great love narrations in connection with the Lord flowing from the mouths of elevated devotees, he says, I have no desire to live in such a place, even for a moment. I prefer to live in the land of Raj, in the associations of villagers engaged in chatting casually there. I will live in Braj, birth after birth. So this is the strong statement. Raghunath, even though Mahaprabhu said to Raghunath, Gramya Katana Suniva Gramya Vartana Kaive, do not speak gossip, nor do you hear gossip. But here he is contradicting Mahaprabhu. He's saying, I prefer to stay in Braj, hearing the gossip of the villagers in Braj. Of course, he's referring to a particular type of talk that seems to be a casual chatting, like speaking some Gramya Katana, like village-like talk. But actually, that represents something very deep, especially to someone like Raghunath Das. So he mentioned this point very strongly, making this contrast. So in this way, this is prescribed, recommended that Raganuga sadhaka should perform their bhajan while residing in Braj. And something is made clear here, both by Vishwanath and both by but Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath also when he comments on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu to this particular verse. So they say, if you are not able to reside in Braj physically for one reason or another, at least you should reside there mentally. Now, of course, it's not that easy. In one case, it's easier to take a plane and be there physically, but than to remain there mentally, even being there physically. So we have to understand this. We shouldn't take this instruction cheaply. Say, oh, well, I cannot go physically, so I will be there mentally. Okay, good luck. I mean, of course, we should do that because we are not there physically, but that's not so easy. And if you are there physically, you shouldn't think that you are staying, that's full Brajavas. You can physically be there, but mentally be somewhere else. That's another point important. And of course, if you are physically in Vrindavan, but mentally somewhere else, most probably in that case, it's better that you may go out physically from Vrindavan and try to be mentally in Vrindavan whenever you may be physically somewhere else. Because it's also a delicate situation to be there physically, but mentally somewhere else. So sometimes the example is given, and Anantadas gives the example. When honey is needed, but when that's not available, one must use brown sugar. So like meaning, okay, something is recommended, but if that's not available for any reason, we should be also realistic and practical and make all sustainable and look for another way of still receiving, in this case, sweetness. So in essence, the meaning of this idea of Kuryat Bhasam Brajes Sada, one should always reside in Braj, is that Raganuga sadhaka should engage in bhakti, in devotional practice, in those places that stimulate one's cherished mood. That's the whole idea of residing in the dam. You will be in a place that will be packed with udipan, with stimulants for your desire affinity. But again, if you are in the dam and you are not perceiving those stimulants and your mind is somewhere else, better you may be some other place and make the proper arrangements so you connect in such a way with those things that really are nurturing your particular mood or affinity. So, Manamora Brindavan, this is the famous say. When Mahaprabhu accepted sannyas and Nityananda Prabhu cheated him no students, yeah, we are going to Vrindavan. Mahaprabhu wanted to go to Vrindavan. Nityananda took him to Shantipur, where Advaita Acharya was there. And Mahaprabhu, when he arrived at Shantipur and realized I'd been cheated, he said to Advaita, oh, no, they told me that I was going to Vrindavan and now I'm here in Shantipur. Advaita, he said many things, but one of them was, you must be joking, man more Vrindavan. Whenever your mind is, that's Vrindavan. Your mind is Vrindavan. So this is the point here. You are residing mentally in Vrindavan. So his point was, wherever you are, that's Vrindavan because your mind is in Vrindavan. Of course, this is not easy. This is not a cheap thing. And that's why sometimes going physically there is recommended. So it helps you to increase your mental residence in Vrindavan. But again, every case is different and one should make the proper adjustments. Also, we have the famous example of Guru Maharaj when he shares, once he shared that Prabhupada, when Prabhupada was leaving Vrindavan physically, some people who were living physically in Vrindavan were concerned and asking, why are you leaving Vrindavan? So Guru Maharaj will say, those people who were saying that, actually they were the ones who were not living in Vrindavan. They were just physically there, but they were not able to mentally reside there. The point is, they were not able to grasp the real conception of essential Brajavas, what's really meant to do that, because if they will be really in Vrindavan, they will have understood, actually Prabhupada is not leaving Vrindavan, but he's extending the borders of Vrindavan to the whole world. He's taking Vrindavan to wherever he's going. Manamora Vrindavan. Vrindavan is his mind. His mind is saturated with Vrindavan. As Guru Maharaj will say, when you achieve bhava, your mind becomes bhava. Bhava becomes your mind. This is some sort of merging, full spiritualization. The same happens with Vrindavan. It's a state of consciousness, Silasya Maharaj will say. Vrindavan is a state of consciousness. I remember also once I asked Guru Maharaj some years ago, because the last time he went to Vrindavan physically, that was in 2007. That's when I met him for the first time personally. So like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 3 years ago, I asked him, do you plan to go again to Vrindavan? So he told me, well, I'm very busy trying to recreate Vrindavan atmosphere in the places I am trying to develop. So again, the same point. Where is Vrindavan? Without Brajavasis, you have no Vrindavan. So those who are really fixed in that Brajavas, well, Vrindavan is there. We have to follow in the footsteps of the Brajavasis. That's the whole idea of Raganuga Bhakti. Braja itself, Braja means to walk. Now Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharmam Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. Braja here means going, walking. So Brajavasi, of course, Braj also means Vrindavan, but Braj means to walk. It implies movement, dynamic. No? Brajavasi is someone who is always walking in the direction of pleasing Krishna. Whatever they are doing is pleasing for Krishna, as Guru Maharaj will say. They may have their own individual tastes, they may have their own particular desires, but all that by the arrangement of Swarup Shakti is pleasing to Krishna. Even when they seem to disobey Krishna, when the Gopas enter the mouth of Agasur, even though Krishna is saying, do not enter, that's also pleasing to Krishna. So we should understand the ways of love. So this is Brajavas, this is Gopi Bhav. What's Gopi Bhav? Gopi Bhav is not just what we may think in romantic relative terms. Gopi Bhav means I am ready for eternal damnation just to satisfy the smallest whimsical idea in Krishna, like the famous example of Krishna's headache. Gopis were ready for eternal hell, just for give relief for 1 minute to Krishna. So that's the disposition. Self-forgetfulness, beyond even self-sacrifice. We know this story. So this is the idea. Vrindavan is a place filled, we could say, Vrindavan is a place which is filled with ideas where you are not measuring the consequences. They are not measuring that. They are not there's no calculation in the movements. They spontaneously are flowing in a natural way, intuitive way, just in the direction of seva. Seva means to give pleasure to the object of your love, of your affection. So that's Vrindavan, the very condensed form of this state of consciousness. Vrindavan, Braj, Golok, cow planet, as Guru Maharaj will say. Those who are like cows, who are only living for to give. No? Their whole life is to give. No? Burma will describe many times. Go seva, cow seva. Everyone there is absorbing cow seva. What does it mean, cow seva? Cow is giving milk. You have to milk the cow. You take the milk. You have to work with the milk. You have to pick the cow dung. When you finish picking the cow dung, you have to pick the cow dung again. And after that, you have to milk them again, and you have to feed them again. So there's no rest. That's the point. 24/7 service, constantly, constantly. And there we find Govinda and Gopal, the one who gives pleasure and protects those who have this type of attitude. So all this is Vrindavan. So I'm spending some minutes here because it's important to understand what's Vrindavan actually. It's not just a plane ticket experience. So how to enter Vrindavan, how to see Vrindavan, of course, so many, how to reside in Braj, so many layers of tests have to be there. No, Narottam will say, Bisaya Chariya Kabe Suddhave Man, Kame Hava Hiravu Shri Vrindavam. He mentioned, when I live material pleasure, my mind will be cleansed, and then I will be able to know Shri Vrindavan. To know Shri Vrindavan means to reside in Braj. Now, again, it's not physical thing, no? It's sense experience, sensory experience. Your senses, as Narottam is saying here, you have to fully engage them for the pleasure of the master of the senses. Hrishikena Hrishikesh Sivaram Sivanam Bhakti Ruchate. That's bhakti. So gradually, Chetodarpanamarjanam, mind will be cleansed more and more. And as you are cleansed, your vision is cleansed, is purified, you will be able to see Vrindavan, you will be able to know and reside there. So again, Sri Maharaj will say it very simply, Vrindavan is a state of consciousness. So it's not a physical residence. If the physical residence helps for that, that's favorable and recommended. But if for certain situation you are living in Braj physically, and that's not good for you, I've known many cases of people almost going mad there because of just insisting on being there physically, but their minds were not yet able to deal with the intensity of such a place. There is intensity, as we have just seen. So we should be mature and sincere enough to know where to relocate ourselves in the specific situation we are supposed to be. So one more mentioning before going to Smaran for some minutes. I think we will see just one part of this first verse of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu analyzed here today. But also when we speak about Braj and residing in Braj and Vrindavan is in a state of consciousness, and well, in Raga-nuga sadhana has to do with the worship of Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan and following the Ragatmikas. I think it's important also to mention, because it's a big topic, but that in our Gaudiya Vedanta theology, this also implies the worship of Mahaprabhu. I think that's already known by you. And the worship of Mahaprabhu implies the projection, eternal projection to live here, to live in Nitya Navadvip with him and his associates. And so when we speak about Vrindavan as the object of spiritual attainment, now the Mayapur is also implied. When we speak about Brajavas, we also imply Navadvip, Nadyavas. So of course there is no separate sadhana for that. So that's where we are speaking here about Raga-nuga sadhana, because in the context of doing this particular sadhana, naturally this double prospect comes there. We have been sharing these days and weeks some articles on that idea, on the Weisen house of Nitya Navadvip, if you would like to go in further detail. So some words I wanted to share with you about the idea of Brajavas. So let me go for some more minutes about the idea of Shmaran. I don't think I will finish this because it's a long topic, but let me share some words about the concept of Shmaran. So in this verse, Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur is mentioning that the limb of Smaranam, remembrance, Smaranam, is prominent in the path of Raga-nuga. And he mentions, since Raga is a function of the mind. So, of course, no, in your mind, you experience Raga. Raga means attachment. So any type of Raga, transcendental, mundane, has to do with the realm of the mind. So Raga Bhakti has to do a lot with Raga and the mind. It's some sort of mental religion, if you will. Lova being its original inaugurator. So let's share some words about this idea of Shmaran and how it applies, how it expresses at which point in our particular lineage. Because there are different lineages, and some lineages will take this verse of Sri Rupa speaking about Shmaran in more even absolute terms, emphasizing that Shmaran, and more specifically Lila Shmaran, remembrance of the past tense, is the most fundamental practice of Raga Bhakti, absolutely. And in this context, they will recommend this type of practice from day one, Lila Shmaranam from day one. Or even I've heard some sad cases that they will criticize whoever is not doing that, whoever is not following that specific emphasis. So without condemning such practitioners, because we will see there's a bona fide side to that, of course, but we will share our particular approach in our Bhakti Nod Parivar, to Shmaram, in the context of Nam Kirtan, Nam Sankirtan. And we will try to show how this approach is totally in line with, of course, Mahaprabhu and our 6 Goswamis. And of course, this will also eventually be connected to the next verse, no? Because we will be speaking about here Shmaran and Kirtan, and next verse we'll be speaking about Siddha Deha or Siddha Rupa and Sadhana. No? Sadhaka, Deha, Siddha Deha. So all the things are interconnected, no? Because Lila Shmaranam is to be performed ideally from such a perspective, Siddha Deha. So we will connect this topic with the next verse as well in the future classes. But let's share some brief ideas before finishing about Shmaran. So we translate Shmaran as remembrance, but what's remembrance, but basically? One second. Okay, so what's remembrance? In our particular experience on this plane, remembrance means to remember something that happened in the past, that we experienced, and we're looking back to that, if you will, some recollection of something that happened in the context of time, past, present, future. But here we are not referring to that, because I mean, if I am to practice Smaranam, Lila Smaranam, Guna Smaranam, I mean, I'm not coming from Golok. I think that's a point that is already clear for all of us. It's not that we have been in Golok Vrindavan with Radha, Krishna, Gopas, Gopis, so we can remember our previous lifetimes there and how we fall from Vaikuntha here. That's not a fact. So what's the point of Smaran, of remembering? And so the concept of Smaran in this context has to do mainly with being aware of something, of someone, in the present moment, in the now. Not something having to do with time as we conceive it, because here we're speaking about eternal time in one sense. And in the context of Bhakti Marg, our particular path, Smara has to do with mental association. The same way you associate with someone physically, okay, there is a possibility of mental association. So Smara has to do with this, has to do with the contact of the mind with the name of Krishna, with the form of Krishna, with the attributes of Krishna, with the Lila of Krishna. Shmaran is not only limited to Lila Shmaranam. We will see we have Nam Shmaran, Rupa Shmaran, Guna Shmaran, Lila Shmaran. So when we speak about having mental association or mental contact, we are speaking about the factual, real contact, not vikalpa, what we call vikalpa. Vikalpa means imagination. Because in our mind, we can create science fiction at every moment. We are not speaking here so much about a mechanic visualization of something that we have not yet experienced. That's some real contact with that. So let me describe briefly about this idea, which is the difference between real contact and imagination. So, for example, regarding perception, for example, let's give the example of a word. We have a word, we have the meaning of the word, and we have the perception of the object that is indicated by that word. So these three are different in connection to material objects. For example, water. You have the sound water, you have the meaning of the sound water, and you have the object of that sound water. But the three of them are not interconnected in an absolute sense. They are different, they're relative. That's why I speak about relative sound. So if we try to experience some unity in the three of them, That's called vikalpa or illusion. In this context, in material context, if you try to make the sound water, the meaning of the sound and the water element one in every respect in your experience, that's called illusion. But in connection to spiritual objects, by Gyan Tattva, as the Bhagavatam will say, non-dual substances, there's no differences at all between these three aspects of perception, between the sound, between the meaning of the sound, and between the object of the sound. Let's use the example of Krishna. Binatvam namanami, no. Between the name and the named, there's no difference. There's absolute platform established here. So in this case, in the case of spiritual objects, if we perceive a difference between these three things, that will constitute vikalpa, or imagination, illusion, on the opposite side. In the case of material object, the fact that we experience the three of them as the same is illusion. In the case of spiritual objects, the fact that we experience the three of them as different is illusion. So my point is, the name of Krishna, the form of Krishna are the same. In the Bhagavad, this is said in the 6th canto, they use the term vikalpa rahita. Vikalpa rahita, which means absence of differences, of difference. There's no difference, abhinatvam, between the name, of course, and the form, and by extension, qualities, lila. So the point is, if we cover the potency of Sri Nam, and by extension, Rupa, Guna, Lila, with our own imagination, that's considered aparat. That's one, though this is one of the Nama aparats to avoid. Try to be careful not to cover Sri Nam, Rupa, Guna, Lila with your imagination in the context of what I've just described. So why I'm saying this? Because in the case of Krishna and his Lila Smaranam, for example, Goswamis are telling us that this revelation will come to us in installments, in sequence. The word for this is krama, or kramena. Kramena means step by step. One thing after that thing, the other step, the other step. Because a sadhaka, if we are sadhakas and not siddhas, we will be only able to accommodate the reflection of Krishna and his lila in proportion to the cleansing of our chitta. If our chitta is not fully cleansed, we won't be able to accommodate all that implies Krishna, Nam, Guna, Rupa, Lila. We only will be able to accommodate in our chitta a reflection of that. But the total experience of Lila cannot happen till the chitta, as we mentioned before, merges and become one with the Swarup Shakti in the stage of Bhava. In the stage of Bhava, our chitta will become Bhava, will merge into the Swarup Shakti, and then we will have full capacity to accommodate all this reality in our own inner self. So in previous stages to Bhava, there will be a gradual insight, a gradual realization of this abhas, of this shadow-like reflection of Krishna. In this sequence that generally is stated, Nama, Rupa, Guna, and Lila. Jiva Goswami establishes this in the Bhakti Sandarbha, 278 Anucheda. He even mentions in between two more items, Nama, Rupa, Guna, Parikar, Seva, and Lila. Name, form, qualities, associates, personal service, and finally the loving interaction, the Lila. And also this goes in the particular order of Shravan, Kirtan, and Shmaran. So in this way, one will start first with Shravan of Nam. No? You please follow me 1 minute more. Nam, we have Nam, Rupa, Guna, Parikar, Seva, and Lila. And on the other side, we have Shravan, Kirtan, Shmaran. So you start with Shravan of Nam. Nam Shravan, then you continue Nam Kirtan, then Nam Shmaran. Then you go Rupa Shravan, Rupa Kirtan, Rupa Shmaran. Then Guna Shravan, Guna Kirtan, Rupa Shmaran, Guna Shmaran, and so on. A step-by-step process, pramena. And the point is, if you are not qualified to progress to the next stage, you won't be able to, if you are not qualified, my point is, you won't be able to enter into the next stage. That's the point. You have to attain full realization of the stage you are in now before you can go to the next one. But sometimes, again, unfortunately, there are certain groups that want to jump directly to the stage of Parikar Smaran. at least, before Lila Smaran. Parikar Smaran means to think of, meditate of your own Swarup or your own identity as associate of Krishna in the Lila. That falls into that category, Parikar Smaran. Jumping over Nam, Rupa, Guna, Shravan, Kirtan, and goes. No? So generally, that's not the best formula, basically. No? So Smaran, real Smaran is another thing. Real Smaran means you are really, again, your chitta has proper, Smaran proper, full Lila Smaran in this case is attained at the stage of Bhav. We can start again to enter into some Abbas-like, shadow-like contact with that before. But real Smaran, the scriptures share many examples of this famous sample of the Brahman who is mentally really serving. No, he has cooked in meditation some sweet rice. It is said that he put the finger on the rice to check if it's okay. No, and it was so hot that eventually he came out of the meditation and his finger and the physical body was damaged. Raghunath Das Goswami's similar situation. So once the doctor diagnosed him with indigestion for overeating, and Raghunath Das Goswami practically he never ate. He forgot always to eat. So it was in his meditation. He has some excess of shira, of sweet rice as well. Examples like Krishna Das Babaji from Govardhan also. They say once he broke a bottle of oil in his meditation, and it is said that all the people that live near Manasi Ganga, where he was living, start to smell that oil. Or also there's one more example of just to give a glimpse of what's real, to be really activated there. Madhusudan Das Babaji, there was one Madhusudan Das Babaji from Suryakund, and it is said that he was playing Holi, this powder color festival with Radha and Krishna in his Manasi Seva, his mental service, and his own body and clothes externally became fully colored by participating in that mentally. So that's full Smaran proper, when you are really there. So we should, my point is, and just with this I'm finishing, we should understand that genuine Smaran, when chanting, will come automatically when Nam Prabhu is unfolding from the influence of this kalpana, of this imagination that may be in the beginning in the form of samapara, that is not allowing us yet to fully accommodate all these elements. So that's why it is said that whoever is hearing and chanting properly, that person do not need even to engage separately in Smaran. The Bhagavad is mentioning that in the 2nd canto, 8th chapter, 4th verse, you find this verse. It says, the Lord quickly enters the heart of the devotee who with faith continually hears and chants about the Lord's activities. And Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur in his Sarartha Darshini, he comments to this verse. He says, effort in remembering Krishna is not necessary for the devotee who hears and chants. Even without great effort, the Lord spontaneously enters into the heart. Thus, hearing and chanting here indicates remembering. As we mentioned in the beginning, you properly engage in Shravan and Kirtan, that will take you naturally to Smaran. You will get mentally absorbed in those things that you are speaking, chanting, and hearing about. With this, I'm not saying you cannot do that. We will speak about that next class. But I want to make this first point clear. So in this way, if even Nam Shmaran, to remember the name, to practice the name, requires a pure chitta for a proper execution. For example, japa means Nam Shmaran technically. And we know, we have experienced that if your chitta is not fully cleansed, you will have some difficulties to fully immerse in japa. And sometimes kirtan will be recommended as a good complement to that till your chitta becomes further cleansed. So if for Nam Shmaran, you require this pure chitta for proper execution, what to speak of Lila Shmaranam, which comes so much after. You have Nam Shmaranam, after that you have so many stages as I mentioned, Rupa, Guna, Parikar, Seva, Lila, and Shmaran. So again, anyone can remember the name of Krishna in the ordinary way. I will remember the name of Krishna and Krishna. But actually only those with a pure chitta can practice Smaran of Krishna Nam proper. So we should understand all these ideas so we do not relate to these topics in a cheap way, basically. No? So I think I may stop here. Of course, there are more things to share, but I think we can continue on Thursday, trying to unpack the remaining content of this first of the 3 verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But of course, if you have any questions, we may share some brief minutes for that as well. So I don't know if there are any questions. Yes.
I have a question, Maharaj.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for this class. I was wondering about, you said in the beginning that we shouldn't think that there are different degrees of surrender among the different bhavas.
Mm-hmm.
You said that it's a mistake to think, for example, that the gopis are more surrendered than Krishna's parents or Krishna's friends.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it seems that it is described exactly in that way, that the friends, they are surrendered to one degree, then the parents, their surrender is more strong, and then the gopis, they are prepared to surrender their very bodies and the whole reputation and so on. That's why it's Kamanuga, it's not Sambandhanuga.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about this point.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Yeah, actually the point, I'm sorry if I was not fully clear when I tried to explain that. The main point here is that when we say that all of them are fully surrendered, means they are fully surrendered in their own specific. Sorry, the video disappeared. 1 second. I'm there. Okay, you are still there, Brigupad. I thought you were going to leave, but nice to have you. So, actually, in one sense, there is some hierarchy described there, as you mentioned. The gopis are offering, if you will, their bodies in charity to Krishna from tip to toe, and as no other devotees are doing in that degree. But the main point here is that in their own particular psychology, which is in the context of Vatsalya, Sakya, Madhurya, Dasya, all of them are really giving themselves fully to the parameters that particular relationship allows the full giving. But they are not just like not so surrendered. They are totally surrendered in the particular context of their own bhav. That's my point. Now, when we speak about the differences bhavs, we may speak about different degrees of, maybe we may use the word surrender, but again, this is tricky because we may enter into this idea of thinking, yes, the gopis are higher than all the devotees because they are more surrendered. And I wouldn't say that in a black and white way, because again, if you appreciate the level of surrender of whatever, Priyanarma, Saka, Yashoda, Nanda, they are just giving themselves fully, and more than that, if you will, but in the particular context of their bhav, which allows a certain degree of expression. Of course, a gopa won't be a gopi, a Yashoda won't be a raktak, because that's their own eternal, Raga-vartma-candrika's eternal disposition. So my point is that we are not to blame. No, she's not surrender as her. Yashoda should be as surrender as the gopis, because that will create rasa vas. I mean, your mother approaches you in a romantic mood. So in order to preserve the sensibilities of rasa, of the experience of rasa, there are different moods and expressions. But my point is, everyone is fully surrendered in the particular department. No? So that will be the main point. But thank you for the question that invited for this further clarification. So something else, some other question?
Dhanavad Maharaj, thank you. It's Omkar, probably.
Yeah. You have
No
a question?
problem. I wanted to ask you if I wanted to do further readings on Kramena. Where would I find these verses, descriptions?
Can you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah, I wanted to do further reading on the installments, the Kramena process. Where can I find the readings?
Well, as I mentioned, on one side, a mentioning of that is to begin with, in the Upadeshamrita of Srila Rupa Goswami. There are more than one verse, not only the 8th verse that I quoted today that speaks about krama or sequence, but there are 1 or 2 more verses in the Upadeshamrita that will speak about use the same term, krama or kramena. So that's a clear emphasis in that regard. And also, apart from that, as I mentioned, there is this section in the Bhakti Sandarbha that Jiva Goswami speaks about this idea of Nama, Rupa, Guna, Parikar, Seva, and Lila, and Shravan, Kirtan, Smaran. So if you want, you can remind me that privately, and I can share you the section, the file, that if you would like to go that further. No? That's a particular section in the Bhakti Sandarbhas. So
I'm just trying to understand more
what.
fully, not to commit.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet is a little bit spotty. It's got a delay. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, because when I'm chanting, I do imagine some form of Krishna or something, and it gives me some cherished feeling in my heart, which brings more enjoyment for my chanting.
Yes. Guru Maharaj once said that. He said, it's not forbidden that you can think of Krishna but in terms of what you have already knew about him, images you have heard, elements, ornaments that accompany him. But again, he made the point, no matter how much you imagine that form, it will never be as real as the form that will be revealed through the chanting. So Guru Maharaj make this point, try to hear the name. Try to hear and just, quote unquote, just hear the name. And by that hearing, Nam Prabhu himself will gradually unfold and reveal his own form and his own quality. And that will be much more real than whatever idea we may have in our mind. That again, it's not that you cannot think at all about that. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but we should also not get overtly attached to the idea that we may have in our mind, because eventually Srinam will really come in his real form. and we have to allow that to happen and to understand, no matter how much I may imagine, that may be still some form of imagination, again, as we were explaining. Again, it's not to condemn what you are doing or for you to feel bad about that. That's not the point, but just to be open to understand that eventually we may conceptualize some things in our head, but that may be something to nurture our practice, our chanting, and eventually certain things will really appear to us, reveal to us in a way that we can never imagine and think about that. So we are hearing, we are learning about Krishna, and it's unavoidable. We will think about those things by the grace of Parampara, Bhakti Shakti. Of course, it's not that that's not real, but at the same time, that's not fully real, as it will eventually express to our lives when our chitta gets more and more cleansed, and all this will be really alive. Like if you are looking at the deity, when you are looking at the deity, and actually, of course, the deity is looking at you, and the deity is not the deity, but it's Krishna himself, Radha herself. But eventually we will realize all the things. In the beginning, we may see the deity, may see a picture, may inspire us, but very different things when you realize the non-difference between the deity and Krishna, Nam and the deity, all the things appear in another way. So we should be open to that. Remember, that's a goal to attain. So gradually, step by step, we should go after that. But if that's giving inspiration, of course, one is not condemning that at all. Okay, something else?
Can I just ask a bit of a follow-up on that, Mars?
Yes.
Yeah, just in terms of it, you had said it would be an operade to use your imagination to, but it seems like the imagination is kind of like one of the senses that we're engaging in Krishna's service. And if it's done, under your imagination is acting according to things that are scripturally accurate, it seems, I just don't quite understand how it would be considered an opera.
I describe imagination in a particular way. I describe Vikalpana as when you speak about three specific types of perception. You have an object, the meaning of the sound of an object, the meaning of the sound of an object, and the object itself. So in this case, let's speak about Krishna Nam. So you have Krishna Nam, the sound, the meaning of the sound, and the person connected to the name. So if you conceive these three as separate, that's Vikalpana, that's imagination, and that's aparat. But if you are not conceiving the three of them as separate, there's no imagination actually. I mean, we may be in the struggle of trying to have an insight, because we, in theory, we may know, yes, Krishna is not different from his name, but in practice, still, we may not have that particular realization. So in that sense, there may be imagination, no? Because again, we are receiving Harikatha, Shravanam, and that's real. I mean, we are reading Shastras, hearing the sadhus, and we receive so many ideas, so many conceptions, descriptions of Krishna, his form, and the Leela, and all that is real. Of course, our own filter, that's another thing. We cannot say also the way that I'm perceiving all that is totally perfect and absolute. Most probably not. So there may be things to purify, but of course, it's part of the process. We are in the process of purifying our mind so we can take full advantage of what's coming to us. But at least it is said, at least do not let your imagination pollute this whole thing. And by imagination, I mean this point. Whatever you are receiving and hearing, try to have that very clear. There is no difference between Krishna and his name, Krishna and his form. No? This is an absolute reality, Advai Gyan Tattva. No? This is a non-dual substance. That's the point. If you fail to embrace the practice from that perspective, then you will have the risk of aparad, because you will be relativizing the absolute, basically. And of course, the further problem of absolutizing the relative. But if we have proper guidance and proper example, we will be blessed and protected, and we will receive Harikatha, and we will be able to properly conceive all the things in our own mind, not letting imagination going in the wrong direction. So I will say that's the main point. No? Trying to not let this be kalpana, no? To not make relative something that is absolute. That's the aparad. Like when they say, okay, you are here in Rasa Lila, and you can commit offense. You can think this is mundane. This is real. You can relativize Krishna's love for the gopis, and that's not to be done, basically. And mainly, we are not yet fully immersed into Madhurya Bhav, if you will, but also we can avoid thinking of those things as a relative mundane affair. So some middle point is to establish there, to be protected from aparad, and gradually we'll progress from there. So that should be the main point regarding imagination. I mean, it's a long topic and we might continue speaking, but in one sense, there is some place for imagination when we'll speak in next classes about Lila Shmara and Siddha Deha in more detail. But even that so-called imagination, we have to use a word for that, it's happening in the context of a particular scriptural revelations, like guidance of the guru, and so on. For example, if the guru is, I don't know, if I will give a brief example. If you have, there are some schools where you receive some prototype of your eternal identity, and you are to meditate on that, but still, actually, you are not there. You have not developed a bhava deha, an identity made of bhav. So we may say you are thinking about that, but you are not there yet. So you may say that's imagination. But it's in a particular context because it's according to certain affinity, to certain projection, to the guidance of the guru. And in time, there may be certain adjustments to that prospect so that it becomes more and more vastu, more and more concrete. So that's one thing, one so-called imagination. But another thing is, again, to see the absolute as relative and to see Krishna Nam and Krishna as something separate and separate guna, rupa, lila, and relativize all that and try to practice with that particular worldview. That will be aparad, and that won't allow us to take full advantage of in our sadhana. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that was a really good clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So one last question maybe before finishing, if there is any questions. If not, we can close today here. Okay, so I think we will finish here today. Thank you very much to all of you for your time, presence, questions. And see you next Thursday. We will continue with the second part of this first of the 3 verses of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is analyzed here by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his 11th prose of the first illumination of the Raga-vartma-candrika. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Raga-vartma-candrika ki jai, Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakurpad ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Pramananda Haribo, Panchakalpataru,
Padmanabha Maharaj ki jai.
Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namo, Nanta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Haribo.